You know, we talk a lot about the benefits of the battery powered equipment, you know, when it comes to the gas and saving money and all that stuff. And one of the big benefits that a lot of people don't realize because, well, some people are intimidated by it and other people just don't look into it, is the fact that this stuff can be very simple to work on. It's not like a regular gas powered string trimmer where you have, you know, a couple hundred components inside here to make up this engine and make everything work. You don't have anything really rotating in here or spinning or any of that stuff inside this because there's no shaft in this. This is all electrical components in here and a wire that runs down the shaft tube, and the electric motor, the part that actually spins, is out there at the string head. So we're going to take this apart and show you what all is inside here, because this is something that if you buy one of these for the convenience of, you know, not having to use gas and not having to mix oil and gas, wanting something that's easy to start, something with less emissions, something that's more reliable, and something does go wrong with it, these things are very easy to work on. And there's actually multiple ways you can fix this, which we'll show you here in just a second. So what we're going to do is go around here and we're just going to take all these screws out of here. This happens to be an Ego ST1500SF, and it's taking a, what is that? It's a T15 Torx bit for these screws. There's quite a few of them around here. And obviously, you know, we have no battery in this because you can't take it apart with the battery in it. There we go. This trimmer's been used and abused a good bit. There's a bunch of dirt down in the holes here, so it's a little tricky to get the Torx bit started in the screw heads. And I think this is the last one. Now, it doesn't matter if you can't get these the whole way out. Big thing is you want to have them all completely loosened up as far out as they'll go, so they flop around free in those holes there, so that you're able to pull this housing off of here. And there we go. Now we'll dump all of our screws out there. We'll pull this off just so you can see a little bit better here. This is it. This is all that's inside of one of these Ego string trimmers. Just an electrical assembly is what they call this, and it goes from your plates right here that your battery connects to all the way up through here to your trigger. There, you see the wire goes in through there. But you have multiple ways of fixing this now. You can go to the Ego dealer or online or wherever you can find Ego parts, and you can buy what they call the complete electrical assembly, which is all of this in here. Or if you want to, you can go through and you can test the individual components, like your switch here for your trigger, back here at your charging plates, and you can just go out to, you know, well, if you can find a Radio Shack anymore, or someplace where they sell electrical components, or even online, and you can replace like an individual switch or something like that. Now, if you go to replace the entire electric assembly, as we said, it's everything here, all the wiring and all that stuff. It is all connected together in one unit. It is most of the times soldered, but you know, if you needed to, you could still cut these wires and solder in new pieces or new switches or whatever there. But the cool thing about this is on a trimmer like this, to get this whole electric assembly here, you know, you're talking like, I think it was like $60 to $65 to replace all these components in one assembly. So that makes it pretty easy for somebody who wants to work on this stuff if they do have an issue with it after a few years of use, compared to working on a gas powered piece of equipment where you have to figure out where the problem's at, then go from there. And you know, if it's a carburetor, you got to rebuild it or replace it and all that. This takes the hassle out of that. So this gives the opportunity to the people who weren't really that hands-on or had kind of lost touch with how things work with a 2-cycle engine and all that kind of stuff. This gives them the ability to just tear into this. They can look up the parts, get it, and then just replace this whole assembly, and it's all pretty self-explanatory when you get into it. You know, here's a connector here. It's underneath some shrink wrapping they put on there. You know, all this stuff could be cut apart, and you can splice in other pieces, and you take this out of here. If you do buy a complete electric assembly, knowing that, you know, there might have been just this part here was bad, you have the rest of that then, that assembly that, you know, if it's still good, your switches and all that stuff, you can save that for on down the road if need be, or, you know, just toss the thing in the trash, recycle it I should say, and put everything back together and off you go. So now you might think it's kind of intimidating to try to get all these wires back in there, but you know, before you tear everything apart, before you pull these wires and stuff out of there, just snap a picture of it with your phone. That way you can see and get an idea of how everything was routed in there if you do have issues later on down the road. This isn't something like working on a gas engine where you need to know torque specs and all that stuff for the individual components inside there to make sure that they're actually going to turn freely or not turn, or, you know, wobble loose or anything like that. This is just a matter of getting these wires back in there, making sure they're not pinched or cut or anything like that, and that's it. So now we'll take apart this assembly here where your trigger and your switches are at, just to show you what's in there and how this harness continues in through here. Alright, we got all of our screws loosened up here, and we'll pull this part off. Took a little wiggling. But you can see here's your switch down here. This is your trigger lock, and then there's the switch right there. You can see it, that white plunger moving in and out. That's the switch that activates everything here. And then we got a screw here we can take out. Get these clamps off to remove the shaft. But now you got a clearer look at everything inside of here. You can see these two red wires. Oh, about to lose everything there. The two red wires and these thin wires right here, they run down to the circuit board here and your switches on your trigger assembly. There's actually a switch here on the trigger lock, a little arm down in there. Kind of hard to see, but when you squeeze the trigger lock, it actually pushes on that switch and activates it, and then that allows you to push the trigger, which pushes this white switch here. So that's it. That's all that's inside of one of these Ego ST1500 string trimmers, and that's all the more there is to it to tear one apart. So I said earlier about how you could test these different components in the harness here, you know, and see if it was just a switch or something to that extent, you know, something you could just fix in the harness, you know, or if it was a pinched wire somewhere or something like that. You can test the components individually, replace them, you know, from parts from an electronics store or another website or something, or you could do the entire assembly, and then here they have the shrink connector, or the shrink wrap over the wires going into the tube. But this entire assembly here, you can replace this as one unit. And that's what we did. We ordered one in, and that's this here. And as you can see back here, this is the part that goes into the tube. These are your 3 wires right here. So these have connectors on them. So if we cut that shrink wrap off there, then we're going to be able to just plug these right in, and then it's just a matter of fitting our harness back down into the rest of the machine, or into the rest of the plastic housing. And it's the same way on all of their other equipment. You know, their leaf blowers, their hedge trimmers, their other string trimmers, the chainsaws. You know, you can get entire electric assemblies, or you can go through and you can just test the individual components and see if it's just a switch, or you know, a pinched wire somewhere. It's not uncommon to have a micro switch or something like this go bad, especially if it gets some age to it, gets a lot of wear and tear on it, moisture gets in there or something. And you can pick these up fairly cheap at a lot of different places. So if it's something like that, you go through and test everything, yeah, it'd be easier and cheaper to just replace this. But if you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to test everything going through this harness, here's your answer. And this beats, you know, like I say, all the stuff you'd have to go through with a 2-cycle engine to figure out what the issue is and replace it and fix it. A lot less time spent just pulling all the wires out, putting them back in, and just making sure they're not pinched, rather than going through and having to, you know, worry about torque specs and things like that. So there you are. We're gonna cut these wires here, and we're gonna splice in this new electric assembly and see if we can get this thing going again. All right, we got this wiring assembly back in the trigger portion of our trimmer here. You can see we cut the shrink tubing off, and we hooked or connected our new electric assembly into the wires going to the tube back here. We got our safety latch back in, and that's working. You can hear it clicking the switch right there. And then we got our main trigger to power the trimmer on. It's working. So everything's good to go there. We're gonna put the tube back in here, and on your tube you got holes right here, and these holes will line up with these spots right back here in the housing. It's not a whole lot there, but it's enough to grab on there to keep the tube from rolling. And that's going to help you line everything up so that when you put your trimmer back together, your trimmer head is straight with the back end of your trimmer where all your electrical stuff is at, so that your trimmer head isn't like cocked at a 90-degree angle or something goofy like that. So these holes and this portion right here in both halves of this trigger housing, that's what you want to line up in those holes to straighten everything out and kind of index everything and keep it straight. Alright, we've got the housing for our shaft clamped down in here, and again you can see, you can hear the click there of that micro switch underneath for our safety, and our trigger switch for the variable speed to power the thing on. That's working fine. And if you notice when you take this thing apart, there are little guides in here on every spot where that wire runs. So again, when you take the shaft out here, take a picture of how the wire is laid in there in case you can't remember it later on. But there's little passageways for the wire to run through so that nothing gets smashed. And you just want to make sure you don't have any wires in the way. Here along the tubing, it's really easy because it just goes right into those little tabs there in the housing to hold the wire in place. But in under here, it can be a little tricky because you do have the moving parts, the switches and everything, the actuators here that move. So you want to make sure that the wires are out of the way of them so they can sit down in the right spots and have free movement without pinching and eventually cutting the wire. Now it's going to be the same thing on the back part of the housing as well, where you'll have the notches and grooves and cutouts and little tabs like you can see right here. Here's one, you know, a spot where a wire would run through there, And this is all designed to keep stuff out of the way and make it easier to put everything back together. You just gotta pay attention when you're taking it apart to know which way to route it around through everything. So again, take a picture of it with your camera as you go, and that way you have a reference to go back to when you start putting everything back together. Alright, now we're going to work at the very back part of our string trimmer assembly here. This is where the battery slides in. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the shaft lined up. Again, there's a spot right here that's going to go into the hole, and it's going to index that shaft with the back end of your trimmer. So you just want to get that in there, wiggle it around, make sure it's in the right spot. First thing we're going to do is we're going to clamp this thing down to this piece here so that we don't have as much movement and flopping around from the shaft out there, so that as we're putting our wires in, it's not pulling them back out. So put the screw in here that holds that clamp on, and there you go. Now if anything moves, it all moves together, so we don't have anything pulling on the wires while we're fastening it together. So we're going to go ahead and get this all routed back in there, and then we'll show you what it looks like before we go and put our cover pieces back on. Alright, we got all of our wires tucked back in here. All of our components are in place, and we got the black shield on the bottom here. We'll slide this one on the top. I'm going to leave that one off there so you can get a little bit better view of everything in there. Looks like we're pretty good there. So we got all of that stuff all good to go, and now I believe we're ready to put our other half on here, and hopefully all the wires will stay out of the way and stay where they need to be, and this will fit together just like it did when they put it together at the factory. So now you don't want to just go jamming everything and squeezing on it and hossing on it. You can tell that something's just not right up here. We have a big gap there. So we're not just going to try to squeeze that together with the screws. We're going to go and we're going to take this apart and figure out what's going on in there to make sure nothing's getting pinched, so that we don't end up having to replace wires or components right away again. So one thing it could be is if this moved slightly on there, which it doesn't appear that it did, that hole does not line up with the index point on here, which there's a little bit of a burr on there. If it doesn't line up perfectly with that, then there could be an issue. So that might be what we're dealing with there. Everything else seems to be pretty good. And we'll make sure that these wires here are down in, out of the way, because that's all there would be up here at the front to hold this thing out of whack. Would be these black pieces, or this wire right here, or this hole just not being lined up. Tell you what, we're going to loosen this up a little bit just to make sure that we've got this thing indexed where we want it. Maybe rotate it just slightly, since there was that little bit of a burr on this other half of the housing. Alright. There we go, pop that in. And I believe that's what it was. It was just that tube not lined up properly for everything to seat together. So there you go. You can see that all of this stuff is fit together the way it should. We're going to put our screws in there and tighten everything back down and get this thing ready to try out. Now, it's always important to get your screws started the right way and get them started straight into these plastic holes, because you can easily strip them out. So what you want to do is you actually want to put the screw down in there, and you want to start turning it backwards like you're going to loosen it, and just wait till you feel it kind of pop into place and center itself up, and then start going forward to thread it in. There you go. We just felt the pop right there. You can almost hear it. Yep. Yeah, you just gotta get a feel for it, because you don't want to just go jamming these screws down in there like we keep saying and just strip the threads out, because then you won't have a you really won't have a good seal on it. There's just more opportunity for moisture and condensation and dirt and debris to get in there and just ruin everything again prematurely. So there we go, popped into place. Alright, I'm going to finish putting these screws in here, and then we're going to find us a 2.5 amp hour battery, see if this thing works. Okay, so I didn't have a 2.5 amp hour battery readily available. Got a 5 amp hour here, but again, all the batteries are interchangeable, so they'll all work in one of these Ego PowerPlus 56 volt pieces of equipment. We got our housing and everything back together. Everything is in there. Nothing's pinched. Nothing's, broken. Slipped our battery in there, and we're ready to give this a whirl. Squeeze down our trigger lock. Hit the trigger, and there we go. So that's it. That was our Ego ST1500SF string trimmer. That's what you gotta do if you have to work on one of these things. If you don't feel confident in going through and testing all the components individually and checking the wiring harness, you can just replace the entire electric assembly and get this thing back up and running in no time. Now, for all of you keeping score at home, this is the old electric assembly here. I did say that you could troubleshoot the different components. Said that multiple times, and that's a way to save yourself a little bit of money if you know how to go through and check these individual components on here. And if you're wondering what was wrong with this one, simple micro switch. And this is the most common failure on any of this kind of stuff, and you'll definitely be able to tell here with the new one. You can hear a very loud click. When this wasn't working before, there was no click, and you can see it. Oh, now it's stuck. The try to get this into focus here. There's a little button right there. Sorry, camera's not focusing very well. But anyway, there's a now it went back in. There's a little button right here. Right there. You can see that little black button has to be pushed in to activate this, and what happens is inside here something just breaks and it stops working. So if we push this in, it just stays in now. It's doing nothing. There's nothing to spring it back. This micro switch was just shot. So you could have, if you wanted to, just gone out and bought a $2 micro switch, cut the wires here, put the new switch in, and been done with it. You would have only had to take apart the front part here where your trigger assembly and everything is at. So you could have saved yourself some time and money. But again, if you don't know what you're getting into with this electrical stuff and you don't feel confident in testing it, there's another way, and it's not all that expensive to do, especially when you compare it to rebuilding a carburetor, or replacing a carburetor I should say, on a gas-powered two-stroke two-cycle piece of equipment. So there you are. This beats putting a new piston and ring and cylinder and stuff like that on a two-cycle, or rebuilding a carburetor or any of that stuff. Now, it is a bit time-consuming if you don't know what you're doing as far as getting the wires back in there. Again, make sure to take good pictures of how everything is laid in there. so that way you know the proper way to route all your wires. This is like a a 25 to 30 minute job according to Ego, and if you've never done this before and you don't pay attention to what you're doing and you just yank the stuff back out of there and you're trying to get it all back into place, it's going to take you probably the better part of an hour to get it done. Now, good news is once you do that, you shouldn't have to do it again for quite a while, but if you do, hopefully the second time around you'll remember to take pictures of it so it's easier for you to get back together. But anyway, there you go. That's it. Just thought we'd show you this. That way you have a little bit more confidence when you go to buy something like this. You know, the whole point of this equipment is making it easier to use, operate, and just improving the entire experience, especially for people that just can't use the gas-powered equipment anymore, whether they can't pull the rope or you know, it's just too much to work on them, or they have them, you know, sitting for long periods of time and they end up having the fuel issues, things of that nature. This is the alternative to all that. And again, there's more benefits to it than just not having to deal with gas. As you're seeing here, pretty simple. You know, you don't have to be very mechanically inclined to be able to pull this thing apart, put this whole electric assembly in here, and get this thing back up and going again. You know, you could pull this thing apart in your garage. You could, if it was cleaned up, you could even do it at your kitchen table if you really wanted to. You know, out on your deck, at your picnic table, whatever. Just don't lose the screws. Pop it out of there, plug everything in, and you're back out and trimming in no time. So, all right, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll talk to you later.